The Korean Peninsula, located between the northeastern part of the Eurasian continent and the Pacific Ocean, serves as a critical bridge connecting East Asia to the Pacific. It's a strategic crossroads between major land and sea powers, making it a key route for maritime forces to expand into the continent, or for continental powers to strike at maritime nations. As a strategic buffer zone in Northeast Asia, the Korean Peninsula is surrounded by powerful countries like China, Russia, Japan, and the United States. The interests of these nations are deeply intertwined, making the peninsula a hotspot for great power rivalry. Any strategic moves or attempts to secure interest on the peninsula by these countries can easily trigger tensions or escalate conflicts in the region. Historically, as early as the beginning of the Common Era, the Korean Peninsula saw the emergence of three kingdoms, Goguryeo, Baekje, and Silla, which coexisted for over 700 years. It wasn't until the 7th century, when Silla allied with the Tang dynasty to defeat Goguryeo and Baekje, that the peninsula was largely unified, marking the start of a relatively unified period that lasted until 1910. In the early 20th century, Japan rose as a powerful military and economic force on the international stage. The Korean Peninsula, located to the west of Japan, holds strategic importance as a link between China and Russia. Controlling the peninsula allowed Japan to strengthen its strategic position in Northeast Asia and prevent other powers such as Russia from exerting influence in the region. As a result, in 1910, Japan annexed the Korean Peninsula, initiating a 35-year period of colonial rule. This lasted until Japan's unconditional surrender at the end of World War II in 1945, leaving the peninsula without a ruling authority and creating a power vacuum. Given the peninsula's critical geographical position, it quickly became a focal point for global power struggles. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union, seeking to protect their respective interests, agreed to divide the peninsula at the 38th parallel. This led to the establishment of separate governments in the north and south of the peninsula. In the south, the United States occupied the region militarily after World War II, integrating it into the capitalist bloc and supporting the establishment of the Republic of Korea. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union occupied the northern part of the peninsula and integrated it into the socialist camp, where Kim Il-sung, supported by the Soviets, established a socialist state under the Workers' Party of Korea. Since the division, the two Koreas have remained in a state of tension, with both claiming to represent the entire Korean nation and seeking reunification, leading to escalating conflicts. Today, North and South Korea remain locked in a tense standoff. In the north, Kim Jong-un's government continues to strengthen its military capabilities, conducting multiple missile tests and military parades and explicitly designating South Korea as its number one enemy, emphasizing that war is not off the table. In response, South Korea has bolstered its military cooperation with allies like the United States, conducting joint military exercises, while also grappling with domestic challenges such as a demographic crisis. Geographically, both North and South Korea are dominated by mountains and hills, with limited flatlands, making large-scale military operations and logistics challenging. The densely populated capitals, Seoul in the south and Pyongyang in the north, are particularly vulnerable to attacks, risking significant casualties and property damage in the event of war. South Korea's terrain is relatively flat and lacks natural barriers, which makes it harder to defend against northern attacks. However, its jagged coastline, dotted with harbors, provides good conditions for naval operations and enhances its defensive capabilities to some extent. Meanwhile, North Korea's northeastern region is characterized by high terrain, such as the Kaema Plateau and the Hamgyong Mountains, offering natural defensive barriers and ample strategic retreat space. The hilly and mountainous terrain also favors defensive operations. North Korea's long coastline, despite its weaker navy, allows for amphibious operations and some coastal defense or counterattacks. In terms of military strength, there is a notable disparity between the two Koreas. North Korea's military has about 1.1 million active personnel, with around 950,000 in the army, while South Korea's military has about 650,000 personnel, with around 550,000 in the army. North Korea enjoys a numerical advantage and a strong fighting spirit, while South Korea excels in equipment and technological sophistication. North Korea's annual military expenditure accounts for about 15% of its GDP, compared to South Korea's 3%, indicating North Korea's significant investment in military equipment and training. North Korea also has a well-developed weapons manufacturing industry, particularly in missile and rocket technology, although its equipment is outdated and gradually being modernized. South Korea, on the other hand, relies heavily on imported weaponry, which is of higher quality, suggesting that South Korea may find it easier to secure support from arms-exporting nations during a conflict. However, North Korea holds certain advantages, such as possessing nuclear weapons, which adds a layer of strategic deterrence. This makes the situation on the peninsula more complex and volatile. North Korea's nuclear capability poses a potential threat to neighboring countries and increases the uncertainty and risks in the region. If nuclear weapons were ever used in a conflict, the consequences would be catastrophic, but this also enhances North Korea's leverage in regional affairs. South Korea's relatively strong economy is a major advantage, allowing it to sustain long-term war efforts. This economic strength also helps South Korea maintain modern weapons and well-trained armed forces. One of the most crucial factors in modern warfare is controlling the air and sea, as these can significantly influence the outcome of a conflict. There's a noticeable gap between North and South Korea in terms of air and naval power. South Korea possesses a modern fleet, including surface ships and submarines like the Sejong the Great-class destroyers and Changbogo-class submarines, which are equipped with powerful anti-air, anti-missile, anti-submarine, and land attack capabilities. Although North Korea has made some progress with its submarine fleet and asymmetric warfare capabilities, its navy remains weak. North Korea struggles to effectively control its maritime territory and is nowhere near challenging South Korea's dominance in the Yellow Sea and the Sea of Japan. This could be a significant weakness in the event of a war, as North Korea might be vulnerable to attacks or blockades from the sea. Both North and South Korea are actively developing their respective military capabilities to gain air and sea superiority. This rivalry not only shapes the situation on the peninsula, but also directly affects the security interests of surrounding major powers. In terms of diplomacy, North Korea has adopted a more isolationist stance. Its economy is relatively weak, further strained by international sanctions and resource shortages. A prolonged war could severely burden North Korea's economy. Although North Korea's relationship with the U.S. has been complicated in recent years, there has been some communication through neutral countries like Sweden and Mongolia. However, North Korea's international support is limited. Despite some cooperation with China and Russia, this support might not be sufficient to compensate for its military and economic shortcomings. North Korea's diplomatic power could certainly use some strengthening. On the other hand, South Korea has been actively seeking cooperation with various countries, though it also faces challenges in its diplomatic relationships. South Korea has worked hard to enhance its foreign relations, particularly in economic cooperation and trade. Additionally, South Korea participates in international affairs, such as the Hangzhou Asian Games, showcasing its presence on the global stage. However, South Korea does encounter challenges in diplomacy. For instance, its alignment with the U.S. in decoupling from China has strained Sino-Korean cooperation, making it more difficult for the two countries to discuss how to restore and strengthen their collaboration. Moreover, South Korea's stance on issues like the South China Sea and North Korea draws international attention, adding pressure to its foreign policy. Still, South Korea is striving to maintain and improve its diplomatic relationships, especially with China. Since establishing diplomatic ties in August 1992, relations between China and South Korea have developed rapidly, with frequent high-level exchanges, increased mutual trust, and expanding cooperation. China is South Korea's largest trading partner, biggest export market, and largest source of imports. In 2022, the trade volume between China and South Korea reached $362.29 billion, reflecting the close economic ties between the two countries. Besides, friendly cooperation between the two nations has advanced rapidly in various fields. More importantly, the U.S. has a significant military presence in South Korea, which provides crucial support. In a war, the U.S. might offer substantial assistance to South Korea, And South Korea's proximity to international aid sources also plays to its advantage. In contrast, relations between North and South Korea remain tense. Despite their geographic proximity and interconnection, deep historical, political, and economic differences prevent them from establishing diplomatic relations or recognizing each other's sovereignty. The border between the two countries is a constant flashpoint, with frequent skirmishes that could easily escalate into full-blown conflict. For instance, the balloon leaflet incident on May 31, 2024, where a South Korean group sent leaflets into North Korea, was seen by the North as a war provocation, sharply escalating tensions between the two Koreas and bringing them closer to war. While we can't predict the exact outcome of a potential conflict, it's clear that war would involve massive human, material, and resource costs, affecting not just North and South Korea, but also many other nations and their people. Any form of war would bring immense suffering, which is why we hope for peaceful solutions over military conflict. However, based on the comparison between the two nations, South Korea, with the backing of major powers, seems more likely to prevail. Is that the outcome you would hope for?